Welcome to A Bird's Eye View. We're going to talk today about the EV ecosystem. I'm Brad Beauchamp, electric vehicle lead for Bluebird, and I have Stephen Koskoletos. He is the Vice President of Strategy and Growth for Polara. Hello, Stephen, and welcome to A Bird's Eye View.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today we're going to explore the other side. I deal a lot on the Bluebird side with the bus itself, right? We got this big electric EV-driven bus, and the districts need a way to replenish the energy in that bus. And I know that in your case with Polara, you've got one-stop shopping.
We do. Yeah, we have a full turnkey solution that we could provide customers that really does bring the energy from the grid straight into your bus.
So that sounds pretty simple. Just all I have to do is call you, and the bus is connected and charges up. Walk me a little bit through what's all involved in that, because I know the bus everybody can look at and they can see. On the infrastructure side, they see what the utility provides, right? You see the wires running out there, potentially a transformer, substation, depends upon where you're at.
Yeah, that's right. It gets tricky on the customer side because the journey is a little messy today. You know, I think they're really trying to find their way in the ecosystem, and sometimes it's not obvious. Because when you're looking at a vehicle, one of the things that ends up happening is the vehicle was paired with a charger. But a charger is not infrastructure. A charger is effectively a glorified switch, you know, with some IoT connections. So what you're really looking for is what will bring utility power into your site. So the navigation around that ecosystem, you don't know who to call. You're not sure what to do. You're probably dealing with a general contractor that's doing, the lighting of your building or your parking lot. So you call them, hey, I'm putting some chargers in. Can you help us out? And they might go to some electrical wholesale company and buy one of those transformers, some switchgear, this and that. And it becomes too many people trying to do this one thing, and there's no vision on the fleet. There's no vision on the operation. There's no vision on the use case. They just want to get the electrical stuff in to give you power. And that's why Polara, we try to take a step back and really analyze, okay, it's a school bus application. This is where your buses need to go. This is what they're doing. You don't need this kind of power. You probably need this kind of power in terms of like magnitude. So we take a step-by-step approach.
So leads me down a path. So I think of this as we're getting down this electric journey on the school bus side, where it's kind of a crawl and then walk and then run, right? The crawling is, I got awarded a couple of buses that are EV buses, and I need to have some way of getting those buses to be able to function. Walking is, I have a fleet of 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, maybe even 12 electric buses, and I'm going to actually need to kind of plan my infrastructure. Running is when, hey, I'm going to be able to convert my whole yard. We have several districts out there that have now 20 plus buses that are operating. Going down that path, the initial conversation and things that I'm hearing from you and also from the districts is calling your district's contracted electrician usually isn't the best first start, is what you're saying.
I mean, it could be a good start because like those guys are really technical. They'll be able to tell you kind of ballpark, installation would be like this. But I think really the first step when you get your award is to take a step back and look at your fleet and say, okay, do I need to put a charger here that's 30 kilowatts, 50 kilowatts, 1 billion kilowatts? Like, you don't know, right? You don't know because you haven't looked at your routes. You haven't looked at, the capacity of your battery. You haven't analyzed the summer condition or the winter condition, because some of your districts, they're up north as well, so there's a lot of snow. So once you've mapped that out and you've kind of looked at your topography, uphills, downhills, because, with downhills, you can take advantage of regenerative braking. So all of these things kind of factor in to the size of charger. And then once you've analyzed that and you've got a good understanding of the landscape, you're able to say, I probably need, like you were saying, 20, so I would need like 10, 30 kilowatts and then 10, maybe 50 kilowatts. And then you're able to say that confidently. And that goes a long way, especially with utilities. Because if you have 10, 30 kilowatts, well, 10 times 30 is 300 kilowatts. That's a 300 kilowatt site, So that's kind of a big deal for a utility. They have to know that that's the kind of load you're trying to pull. So yeah, I would say like a very solid step one to answer your question would be just look at your fleet, look what it's doing, try to find a charger that matches up with making sure the bus is able to get to where it needs to go, and then after that, planning out more of the engineering and installation side.
Perfect. So when you talk about that, the first step you're going to take then is maybe through your school's electrician, but then how important is it to let the utility know what your plans are?
Oh, yeah, super important. Because at the end of your project, remember, you have to connect to that utility. That's where your new gas is coming from, right? It's coming from your utility, which is nothing new. Buildings are powered and gassed up by the utility. Everything can be connected. But sometimes that infrastructure is not in place. So if you let your utility know, 300 kilowatts is what you need, and the utility transformer isn't in place, and it becomes a bigger project where there's delays on that side. Obviously, we like companies like ours can come in and try to help reduce those lead times. We've got technologies that we'll probably get into that can help that. But I think ultimately, if you don't let them know, and then you start doing things, and then you're ready for that tie-in, and they tell you it's a year out, you're kind of in trouble.
Yeah, so it's super important that the utility at least understands what the scope of the project is so they can also be able to plan for it. Or if they can't, I know you have solutions for that, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but if they can't, that there's a way to actually be able to make this infrastructure not only be able to be put in, but as seamless as possible.
Exactly. And oftentimes, at least in the installations we've done, it becomes a negotiation between what the transporter wants to do and what the utility is capable of doing, or vice versa. So sometimes ambitions are really, really high and utility doesn't have enough power. And then the opposite sometimes happens also, where the utility has all the available power that you need and they're ready to go. But, it's a pilot project and it's only 3 buses. So, it's all good. We'll just connect those to the building and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're starting to scope this out, it's a little different from those that just have an electric vehicle for their own use, right? As one, you're in the bus world. These are primarily route buses right now. They're not doing long distance trips, so they don't have to worry about public infrastructure. And 2, like your personal vehicle, it's a single vehicle. You're often plugging in at home, right? Where these buses are going back to a depot. In a lot of cases, they're being plugged in a yard. So walk me through that, the difference in doing the landscaping for a yard versus your own personal retail vehicle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the differences are colossal. Everything is. So think about it this way, right? Your battery of your vehicle is able to charge at pretty much almost any kind of kilowatt, and the public charging networks are mostly made for that kind of kilowatt. Just look at the new, the new Tesla standard that came out, the NACS standard. If you look at the chargers that are applicable for that kind of standard, you've got about a 500 volt maximum output. And for cars, that's fine because most of the car batteries are 400 volt. But when you're looking at bigger, like school buses, those are 620, right? So a 500 volt charger on a public charging network wouldn't work. Right. So when you're planning out, your personal car, and you've got your itty bitty AC charger that's in your garage, and it probably does 7.2 kilowatts, and you're okay because you're parking your car in after work and you're leaving it overnight and then you're taking it out the next morning. That seems okay, and then you connect it to your electrical panel at home. When you're planning a bus route, well, public charging may or may not be an option. And then also the whole centralized charging model where everything comes into one location to charge, well, that draws a lot of power. So it's no longer the same panel that's in your building. Now it's a dedicated entrance from the utility with its own panel and its own metering. And a lot of times that stuff needs to be controlled because you can't just pull as you feel from the grid. You want to do something that, the industry likes to call energy manage and optimize, the charge of your batteries.
So definitely a different landscape from just a single personally owned vehicle that you bought in the retail market to run. At the same time, it is kind of the same equipment, right? We're using right now, you mentioned the NACS standard, but right now we're still using the SAE J1772 with the CCS1 if it has DC fast charge capabilities. So theoretically, a lot of that equipment would plug into the bus. But what you're mentioning is there's some differences in the way that equipment operates on the higher voltage side that you have to consider, right?
Absolutely.
So it may plug in, but it may either may not be optimal to charge that bus, or may not even be able to charge the bus at all based off the voltage it's able to go up to.
Yeah, that's right. I think battery architecture plays a big role, but also vehicles tend to have a onboard box that tends to convert AC power to DC power. So if you did want to plug in an AC charger onto a vehicle, I know your first generation bus was able to do it. So that could be a viable use case. And those AC chargers could go up to 19.2 kilowatts. That's an 80 amp charger. It's pretty decent, but that wouldn't be a good emergency charge. That wouldn't really be it would have to be an overnight charge. So that bus wouldn't be available for quite a bit of time if you're coming in at a low state of charge and you're just leaving it there. So it's just one of those things to consider when you do go AC charging. However, you do save quite a bit of cost on the infrastructure because AC chargers tend to be, relatively inexpensive.
Yep, AC chargers are definitely a commodity item now, whereas the DC fast charge is still a little bit of a premium, sometimes a lot of a premium, depending upon what you have to put with it. So let's get a little bit into some of the pain points that we're hearing. We've got 2,000, actually more than 2,000 of these buses that we built so far, starting in 2018 till we sit here today in 2024, and we've learned a lot.
I'm sure.
One thing, as you mentioned previously, is those that understand EVs are thinking like their personally owned vehicle, 120 kilowatt, maybe even 300 plus kilowatt input is possible. For the truck and bus world, it's different because they have dwell time, at least in the school bus world. So typically 60 to 80 kilowatts is the max that we can put into one of these buses. That's the first, I'll say, pain point is understanding what do I really need to get started. And I'll touch on a second pain point, which is temperature. But the first one is, okay, I've just got a couple of buses. That 19.2 AC at 80 amp can be wired in, probably has to have a separate panel and feed and some breakers for it, but fairly simple and might be the easy start, the natural start, right?
Yep.
But as you go up, as you mentioned, you need a recovery mechanism, right? Something went wrong, the charger didn't get connected right, the breaker tripped, the power went out at night, and I suddenly need to replenish that bus in whatever I can, an hour, a couple hours time. That's when DC fast charge comes in. So as you're initially looking at somebody that's just got a couple new buses and you're starting to put an ecosystem together for them, what kind of things are you encountering as you're out there doing site surveys and starting to prep to do work?
So that's a good question because there's a lot of things that we do behind the scenes that sometimes aren't very obvious to the transporter right up front as to why they're getting done, but they're very important in terms of most of the stuff that you're saying. So, for example, if you were to deploy 4 buses, well, maybe a conversation that we're having with the transporter is, do you put 3 level 2s and 1 DC fast, just in case for that emergency charging if it ever needed to happen. Also, most initial rollouts isn't the entire fleet. I've very rarely seen let's do all my buses right now. That doesn't really happen that often. So making sure that all the infrastructure that you have, even behind the chargers that are setting these, let's say 3 level 2s and 1 DC fast up, is also able to scale. Because the last thing I think a transporter wants to do is start getting into construction projects year over year. So having a back-end electrical system that's able to scale with the fleet helps quite a bit. And if, for example, the use case of 3 level 2s and 1 DC fast becomes, well, wouldn't it be nice to have another DC fast? Because I always find myself doing a field trip and I know I said this in my fleet analysis, but it turns out this is more my reality. So, without breaking concrete, getting more conduit in, pulling more wire, it'd be nice to just be able to say, okay, let me just slap on another charger here and, away we go.
So with that, as somebody starting down the path, is it smart for them then to think about the initial project of putting in that conduit and the extra panels, and even if they're not wired together yet, is it smart to start in that project going that way? And if they didn't, is there methods that you have to be able to not have to bust up pavement to be able to put some additional infrastructure in?
Yeah, so we have a solution that we've developed that we call the charge pack that becomes modular and scalable. But before I talk to you about the charge pack, I think the industry standard today is to set up a site with a what we call like an e-house, which is it looks like a shipping container that's filled with electrical equipment. And those e-houses take a lot of real estate. So that's the pain point we were trying to solve at Polara. What do I do? Do I get a smaller e-house that does my 5 buses today? And if I need more buses in the future, do I just put a second e-house? And at this point now, you've got something that's like 40 feet long, and you're doubling up on technology. So in our first deployment, we actually put one in, and we found some problems with them. I'm sure certain vendors do it better than others, but obviously having an AC system is an issue, right? That's a single point of failure of that container. And the one that we have installed, even in the winter, that air conditioning runs. And I'm from Quebec, and Quebec winters are brutal. And having an air conditioning system run inside a container in a Quebec winter where it's like minus 20 Celsius, what's that in Fahrenheit? Whatever. It's cold.
Yeah, it's cold.
Right. So that's just efficiency loss, right? And if that thing fails, well, not only does the container shut down because of thermal overload, but you've got the whole row of chargers that it's powering going down as well. And that means your bus isn't running in the morning, and that's not acceptable. So we looked at that. We also looked at transformers that tend to be like single phase and multiplied often. So you'd get a container that's got like 3 single phase transformers in there. And then you've got individual 3-phase transformers per DC fast charger. So that's a lot of real estate, and especially if you're working, up in the Northeast, New York downtown, for example, there's no room. Those buses are parked like sardines. Even the ones in the middle are challenging to charge, right? So, we classic. There's got to be something better. So we launched an R&D project, and we've got a solution now, the Charge Pack, which is a modular, scalable skid solution. It kind of looks like it kind of just looks like a skid that fits inside a parking stall. So think of like a metal base, and the equipment that's on it, well, and this is the secret sauce, they click on and click off like Lego pieces. So if you wanted something bigger, I'll click off the thing that's small and click on the bigger thing. So whether it's a panel, a transformer, or a switchboard, it just clicks. So, you never need to have a gigantic container that's mostly empty or a small container that's jam-packed so you can add a second one. We're not breaking conduit. We're not doing any of that stuff.
So very modular. So that a size that can be upgraded, can fit the job. So that's super interesting.
That's right. It's got a limit. It's 4 megawatts on the high side, but still very interesting to sites that are planning phase rollouts.
So you had mentioned actually having to chill in chilly weather, it's interesting to think that you would actually still, even as cold as Quebec gets, that you'd still have to have that to occur. Going down that same line, we get the same thing on the bus side, right? A bus that's running in very cold temperatures has a very different charge curve and charge cycle.
Oh, for sure.
There's a bus that's in, let's say, Phoenix, Arizona, where, it could be 100 plus degrees, or, 37, 38 in the Celsius world. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So how is there considerations around the environment that these buses are running in, whether it's temperature, whether it's pulling, you mentioned top of the hill, right? Charge it up the top of the hill and you have all that extra range when you get to the bottom. Or do you put the yard at the bottom of the hill so it's fully charged when it does the run up the hill? Urban, you mentioned urban, right? Where the packed in's like sardines, and we've got these buses running of the 2000 in the U.S. and Canada. They're running in urban environments. They're running in suburban environments.
Oh, for sure.
They're certainly even running in rural environments. What kind of differences do you have to consider with those factors?
Oh man, those are wild because everything has a challenge, right? So the rural stuff that we've seen in our installs, you'd get chargers that can't be 3-phase, like that doesn't exist out there, so it's got to be single phase. In the urban stuff, it's like, okay, well, where do I put the charger? Because remember, this is like a real physical piece that gets put in the ground, right? So your regular operations where it's almost like an open parking lot, well, now you've got like effectively a bollard, in your way that has a charging system on it, so in urban landscape, that's usually the case. If you go into the Northeast, or if you go towards the California region, or even just the entire West Coast, lots of topography. You got the Appalachians out there, you got the Rockies out this way. So lots of uphills, lots of downhills. If you don't take into consideration, you might be caught with your pants down, or with a flatbed.
So it sounds super important to be able to size the infrastructure and have the actual rationalization of how these vehicles are going to be used, the temperatures, the climate, the environment, whether the drive cycles and duty cycles are what's expected. So you touched on it. You mentioned single phase and three phase. And while that sounds simple to those that have been involved in this in a while, there's a number of sites out there. Everybody knows how to fuel with gas and diesel. And obviously we have propane, and there's even a familiarity with that. When it gets into this electric infrastructure, things as simple as, do I have single phase or three phase electric becomes a challenge. Let's say I don't, like you were saying, there's a lot of places that really don't have the ability to have three phase power. Is there a solution if I need three phase power to be able to run a DC fast charger?
Well, if you don't have three phase power, so the question is, if you don't have three phase power and you need to put a three phase DC fast charger, what would be the solution? That would be tough. Because at that point, I think you would have to resort to a DC charger that would be able to accept the single phase.
So you really got to think through that as you're starting to do your initial planning, right? What do I have available?
Absolutely.
What's coming in, so that you don't end up with, I would say, situations where you have a charger picked out, and it's not compatible with the number of phases coming into your facility.
Well, you touched that earlier. You were saying the utility, it needs to be involved early, and the utility would tell you right away. It's like maybe it'd be part of their roadmap and their plan to bring three-phase power, but if it's not there, that's a utility infrastructure upgrade, which could take some time.
So if I have single phase, am I still going to be able to put infrastructure in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are chargers that take single phase that are on the DC side and also on the AC side. AC side is all single phase stuff. So
very good. Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with us here today about infrastructure and the infrastructure ecosystem that's out there. We know it's a journey that we're all heading down, and we're learning as we go along. The one thing for sure is there are some pain points, but there certainly is also the ability for folks at Polara to come in and help you figure out how to size it, scale it, make it simple, make it expandable, and make it fit even for the future. And so there's a bird's eye view of the EV ecosystem.